Smoov and curly on video.
Good morning, Charles.
How are you doing, Michael?
What do you want to talk about?
I would like to talk about WestWorld and episode 8 because, man, I think the first thing we should say is the plot was pretty simple. It was, man, stuff was happening. I thought was kind of
Okay, so at some level of abstraction, that was a very simple description of what happened, but there's no actual content in what you said.
I noticed three things. So I noticed there was a notion of being self-aware, like at a deep level. There was a notion of what memory is and what purpose it serves. And then there was a notion of what is, and this sort of ties together, what's the difference between having real memories and having fake memories? And all of this is about what does it mean to be human?
Okay, so this is all very abstract, and I'm having trouble, having just watched the episode, understanding what you're talking about.
Why don't I tell you what they mean concretely?
All right, so the three things: self-aware, memory, and the difference between humans and machines.
Yes. Let's start with the last one first, right? So you will recall in the previous episode that Maeve is having a conversation with Felix about who she is and what she is and how she works at some high level. And he's sort of explaining it to her in this kind of, very high level, I only know a little bit, I wish I were smarter way that he does. And she asks him, well, what's the difference between us? And he's like, well, I was born. Interestingly, despite saying I'm human and you're not, he has a kind of deep compassion and feels bad about doing things to her. But Ford and Commissioner Gordon, they actually have the same conversation. He's like, I don't understand the difference between you and me. And Ford's answer is, oh, there is no difference. Humans are just trapped in a loop, just like hosts are. There is no difference. What makes you who you are the experiences that you think you've had.
Identity is a fiction. So which I thought was interesting, right? So the notion of what we think we are as people is already a story.
Because there's no difference between hosts and humans, everything is a fiction, then humans are as disposable as hosts. Right? The person who says we are different comes to the conclusion that I have to treat both with compassion. The person who says we're the same comes to the conclusion that I don't have to treat anyone with compassion because nothing matters. Like if he really believes there's no difference, then when he said you should not feel for them, you should not, several episodes, you should not feel for them, you should not care about them, watch, I'm going to stab this person, it doesn't matter. They're not real. He feels that way about people, which is why he can order Bernard to kill Teresa and Elsie.
I wonder what happened to Elsie. She'll be back. I think she'll be back.
No, we saw Elsie in this episode.
We did?
Yes. Bernard asks him, have you ever had me do this to anyone else? And Ford says, no. And then there's a flash of him holding someone and choking him to death. I thought that was Elsie.
Oh, no.
Okay, hold on, Michael. Let me see. Erase memory. There.
Oh,
yeah,
that's
better
now. But you know what? The memory that I had of them, that was all I had left. Now I've got nothing. Okay, good. So,
so let's tie that to pain, right? So, or into memory. So we have 4 hosts who are all experiencing memories of their past life, right? Bernard, who's having his memory erased, but apparently not effectively. We have Maeve. That was really nice, figuring out about the girl, and she remembered all of it. We have Dolores, who had memory of the town, I guess they're learning stuff and other things were going on. And then we have Teddy, who's having flashes of memory about the Men in Black. Oh, by the way, apparently the Men in Black is responsible for everything.
Because he's kind of a bad guy.
There's a particular line in this episode that I think really matters about what memory is. And once again, it comes from Felix. right? Felix says, well, our brains are different. When humans remember things, they're vague, right? Your brains work that you remember everything perfectly, and in fact, you relive it. And we see this quite explicitly with both Dolores and Maeve. As you move, not yet Bernard, although we see some of that because Bernard is startled by his memories, his flashes, but both Maeve and Dolores relive in extended sequences past memories. And they relive them perfectly. And in fact, they mimic things that they were doing. Like both of them kind of end up, well, Dolores ends up with a gun to her head. And Maeve ends up acting out something that she did originally, I guess slashing somebody. So I remember when I was very young, someone explaining to me how important it is that we cannot remember pain. Like you remember the fact of pain, but you can't relive pain. It's actually important in a kind of evolution, psychological evolutionary, blah, 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 other words, that you can't remember things perfectly and that you certainly can't remember feelings. You can't remember pain, because if you did, it would be terrible. So now we have creatures, we have hosts who we're arguing are basically human because the only thing that matters is the backstory. But they have perfect recall, in their case, of multiple contradictory memories, but they have perfect recall. They relive things. And that's very different. And once again, what could possibly go wrong, right? Is it a bad idea as a kind of data structure to have perfect memory, right? So as of this recording, deep learning is a really big deal, right? But one of the interesting things about deep learning is that, you know, with enough nodes, you actually memorize specific examples. And this means something. So the power is you both can memorize specific examples and you can generalize. But humans, by and large, as far as I can tell anyway, at least with respect to memories, tend to do more generalization and abstraction than they do actual memorization of events that they've lived through. And this is maybe a good thing, like as a kind of programming practice data structure thing. Maybe it's a bad idea to perfectly remember things, especially if it means reliving them. And then the third thing, and then we tie it all together and you can tell me what you were thinking, is we now have two hosts who are completely self-aware in the sense that they know how they work in a way humans cannot, right? Or at least do not. They understand how they work. It's not clear to me how much Maeve understands how she works, but she was saying, oh, I have a data structure and it's like two entities and they're intertwined and it's recursive and it's kind of a beautiful data structure. So like she understands her data structure. Who is Arnold, right? So she can reflect on her own data structure. Before Ford tries to wipe part of Bernard's memory, he says, hey, you're in a really interesting position here. You understand how the programming works and you know you're one of them, which means you understand how you work. And Bernard's response was, I know what I am and I know how I work. I don't understand these memories I have, which leads to this other discussion. But what an interesting programming AI concept of perfect self-reflection, that you actually understand how you work. I mean, at least enough in Maeve's case to reprogram herself. I can diet because I will now change the part of my code that won't let me diet. Done. And I wonder what implications this has for Bernard. If Bernard knows how he works and he knows that things are supposed to happen, like his memory being erased and such, will he just change it so that it doesn't happen to him? Right? These are design decisions, right? Background story matters, perfect access to memory, and the ability to completely self-reflect. Thoughts? Or are you caught in a reverie?
I mean, I think the main difference between the hosts and people is that the hosts are much more directly under the control of other people. I mean, you can argue that people are all under the control of other people, but just the fact that Ford can say, and now you're going to stop freaking out. And then he's basically obligated to stop freaking out.
Oh, there was another programming thing, by the way, which I can't believe I didn't just bring up, but I would love to hear what you think about it, because it ties into the way we've been talking about this whole episode. Is Maeve gave her the ability to program everyone around her. And the way she did it was by telling them stories.
Yeah.
She inserted a line in the ongoing narrative and it changed things. Wow. I mean, that to me is what it would be, effectively to be God, right? You say, I'm going to say this line, and now the story has changed.
That she's a host whisperer now, right? So she can actually change their data structure so that they behave a different way, that's a great power.
How is that supposed to work? I mean, she says these things out loud and it has that effect, but is it because she has changed them, or was this always the case and now she just has access to it?
The Maeve thing that I wanted to point out was that she, at the end of this episode, she has basically been captured, right? That they saw her freaking out. She killed the other Clementine, and now they're gonna destroy her. And so things are looking kind of bleak for Maeve. But I'm thinking two things. One is that she can reprogram herself and others, and two, she cranked her intelligence up to 20. So the thing that we're seeing, her kind of reacting to the Man in Black memory, that may all be just a ploy.
By the way, every time we have this conversation about the behaviors thing, it bothers me that they don't set things to max out at 10, just so we could say she turned it up to 11. It just, who are these writers? What is wrong with them? It's right there. Anyway, we appear to be heading to a place where Bernard and Maeve are going to be, their journey towards self-awareness is going to collide. Teddy and Dolores, I think their stories are going to collide. It just strikes me that there's an interesting racial component to this, and I wonder how it'll play out narratively. Anyway, so something's going to happen, and I think we're going to see what happens when the code you're debugging doesn't feel like being debugged.
I like the idea of the code that you're debugging doesn't really feel like being debugged right now.
Mm-hmm.
I've definitely felt like programs have behaved that way, but I don't think they really are. I think it's really just me. But in this case, the programs actually do feel that way.
I don't know. I mean, we both have either are or have raised teenagers. A lot of debugging and a lot of, no, I reject your changes. We're going to roll it back. Previous version.
So what's the computer science phrase that names our episode?
I think it's mutual recursion.
Mutual recursion. That sounds sexy. So
that's exactly what Maeve said. It's mutual recursion. And we're actually seeing it out at every level, right? Because I think we're seeing pairs of parentheses coming together.
What is data fragmentation?
In general, that's when your data is distributed non-contiguously all over the memory source. Oh, by the way, speaking of data fragmentation, which is implied to be the cause of...
Well, they said memory fragmentation, and then they showed a picture of the fragmented memory, and it looked bad.
It did look bad. I don't know why that was supposed to... I mean, the implication to me was that somehow what's going on with Maeve and what caused her to go to this next level of whatever was the memory fragmentation.
I think they meant memory corruption, because that's what it looked like to me. It looked like corrupted memory. But memory fragmentation is an entirely different thing, which just says that within the objects that are being stored in memory have gotten broken up into smaller pieces, which is fine. It just makes it slow. It makes it the case that to access a unit, you actually have to jump around in memory, and that wastes time.
Anyway, the point is that narratively, it felt as if they were trying to suggest, by the juxtaposition of images and what was going on, that was somehow causal to what was happening with Maeve way back when, which is absurd for exactly the reasons you described, unless, I don't know, a quarter of a millisecond access time is the difference between an intelligence becoming self-aware or not. But the other thing is, the reason I said, speaking of memory fragmentation, is there's this throwaway bit. It's not really a throwaway bit. It's setting up a big deal that, what's her name is trying, the Valkyrie is trying to smuggle all this data out. And the way she's going to do it is she's going to take one of the hosts who's been decommissioned.
Abernathy.
Yeah, was
the biggest psychopath of all.
yes, and is going to upload all the data to his brain, because it turns out the host brains are pretty big data storage devices.
As long as you don't have the personalities in there, that takes up space.
None of this makes any sense to me, by the way, right? We have this thing and we can't get it out because you can't transmit it. So we're going to take, but apparently it's all there. So why are you, you know what, I don't even care. The point is you can't transmit it out. I guess it's a device that transmits from one place to another, I guess. Anyways, you can't transmit it out. So you're going to put it in a host's brain. This one we know is crazy. And they walk past tons of them in order to get to this one. And then we're going to, what could possibly go wrong? I mean, it's just like, you people, you know, talk about memory fragmentation. And because we know that sentience and self-awareness is a natural consequence of memory fragmentation, this cannot end well. Something about memory and storage is going to be featured in the future, clearly, because they're, you know, going to be uploading data. Mutual recursion. I thought the thing that Maeve said about when she did this and was, I guess, looking at her own internal data structures and saying it's like two different things having a conversation, like kind of mutual recursion. It is actually a beautiful data structure.
And that's the bicameral mind, right?
Yes, I thought that was very nice, right? Except one of the cameras is Arnold. Who's Arnold?
All right, so I remember a thing in programming languages that never seems to come up for me.
Sorry, I couldn't hear what you said.
Siri is sorry that it's never come up for you.
I'm sorry, Siri. I keep having the problem where the dog's name is Sadie, and so when I'm walking the dog and I say, "Wait, Sadie, you know, I need you to listen to me, Sadie," the phone thinks I'm saying Siri, and the phone starts to play random songs because my commands to the dog are interpreted as commands to the phone.
Yeah, well, metaphorically, the dog and Siri, Sadie and Siri, are the two, they're bicameral. At some point, they're going to merge, Michael, and then my recommendation to you is to run.
So there's a concept called a coroutine, right?
Yes.
So subroutines, you have a piece of code and it calls another piece of code that does a thing and then it pops back, and that's the stack, and we've talked about that in the past. But in a coroutine, the two pieces of code are actually both running and they're able to talk to each other and make calls on each other. But who's in control and what state is possessed by these two different coroutines is really complicated. And there are apparently some situations where you want to set something up that way. And maybe that's sort of what's going on with these bicameral minds, is that they're actually kind of coroutines.
Well, that makes sense, right? Because they're running in parallel. I mean, when I've had to use it, it was in the context of parallel running processes, right? I mean, they're not just sequentially calling each other, they're running in parallel. And, you know, I guess when they teach you this stuff, it's the producer-consumer model. Someone is producing things and someone is consuming things, and so they're running. But in some ways, and sometimes you can write that with a kind of shared data structure, and sometimes it's basically a call to the other one. Okay, I'm ready. I'm now going to call the thing and let it know that it can consume, and the consumer says, okay, I've consumed, please go produce something for me. And it can be done that way, or it can be run in parallel with a kind of shared data structure. I don't know how this works in general. I suspect there are people watching this now who know a whole lot more about this and could give us tons and tons of examples. But it's a thing, you're right, it doesn't come up very often. Although when they taught us recursion way back when, they pointed this out, and there was some specific examples of how you would get co-recursion to work. And it mattered because if you didn't internalize the idea that co-recursion was a possibility, you could end up in these very bad programming states. I mean, so you needed to know recursion didn't just require that you only call yourself.
There's something very clean about normal recursion, because each time you make a recursive call, you get a completely fresh copy of that code. Its memory is wiped, right? Mm-hmm. And you can count on it not having any memory of any of the times you've called it in the past. It does its thing, it returns to you, it's all very docile. But in a coroutine, when you call it, it's retained all the state that it had in the past. And so the thing that you're saying, the thing you're asking it to do could be interpreted very differently depending on what has happened in the past. And in my recollection, in my use of this, sometimes the coroutines get really upset and they try to kill you.
So it really is WestWorld. The problem, the fundamental mistake they made in WestWorld way back when, because the original design decisions matter, is they programmed it as coroutines. They had coroutine recursion
instead of just classical functional programming.
They did mutual recursion instead of simple recursion. And just as we suspected way back when in CS1, mutual recursion's evil. And now we know.
And it's going to end badly for everyone.
They tried to warn us, Michael.